Good morning, Lauren. And so we're talking to Lauren Sage. And Lauren, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I guess the first thing to realize is I'm a mom, and I've been doing life coaching and business coaching for the last 15 or 20 years. But before that, I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma where the only goal that my family seemed to have or encourage from me was to find a good man and to have a family. And though I feel like family is amazingly important, it just didn't sit well with me that it would be my entire story. I spent a lot of time running away from that and that idea and going from place to place to discover who I was. I randomly stumbled upon a career in which I was very successful, which led me to share that success with others through business coaching. I love helping people, so that put me pretty much on the right track to find some real fulfillment in certain areas of my life. But while working with these business coaches and these business owners and coaching these businesses, people from all over the United States and other countries, I realized that in order to help them to create a successful business, that it was important to help them to take an honest look inside to determine things about themselves. You know, things such as, why did I begin this career? What do I love about it? What are my beliefs about it? And so on. So the longer I worked with people, the more I noticed that what I was really doing is working on the individual to work on and in the business, which then created the space for them to be successful. And that led to something that more resembled life coaching. I now work with people with a greater understanding that when we work on balancing ourselves, it affects everything we are and everything that we do.
Wow. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sure,
did you
go
find that most of the business owners you worked with had the same issues as far as time management or as far as their personal lives, and that caused issues in their business?
Absolutely. There are six factors that we have to look at balancing. So if we look at balancing those 6 factors, usually the people that I work with either had one of those things were out of balance or multiple things were out of balance, because once we actually kind of shift to a point where we recognize there is lack of balance, it tends to get worse and worse and worse, so we pull away from more and more areas of our life. So I would say actually every single person you work with falls within those 6 categories.
And those 6 categories are?
The 6 categories are relationships. We have the career, spiritual, health, financial, and well-being.
Okay, so let's start with the first one you mentioned, relationships. When we talk about business and building a business, I mean, the number one most paramount thing that is present for me anyway is that it's all about the relationships that we have, relationships with our staff, relationships with our customers, relationships with just about everyone we interact with.
Absolutely, and I think that people don't recognize that too, that the relationships aren't just the romantic relationships that we're talking about in our lives, but it's also about the relationships we have with others. It's kind of more about interaction, and so this could mean the relationship you have with a spouse or a loved one, the relationship you have with family members, the relationship you have at work, and so on.
Now, there's an exercise that we actually do during our Finding Balance seminar where we work on interaction. Can you give us a little bit of an explanation on how that would impact somebody who's not consciously aware of their interaction in the various relationships that they have?
I would say part of that is like learning, I know with the yin and yang, it's like it's considered dark and the light, but it's also considered multiple other things. It's also considered give and take. And that, I would say in this particular scenario, if we're talking about relationships, give and take is very important. If we have to recognize that we're not always in control, nor should we always let someone else be in control, if there's a harmony and a balance to every single relationship that we have. And that means that we have to start to recognize and compromise while still being true to ourselves.
Right, and this is very important. And
Absolutely.
So how does that play out then as we talk about romantic relationships? There's tons of business owners that are married or have girlfriends, and that presents a challenge with the number of hours they work at work and different things. What would be your best advice for them?
should never come second to anything else. You know, relationship, that's, I think, the number one thing is that, is your relationship coming second to something else? And if that's the case, then, you know, because relationships are such a huge part of our lives, let's say we spend what percentage of our life, you know, down to this relationship, this person's responsible for, or could be, or may be responsible for our home, or partly of our livelihood, and maybe the father or the mother of our children. These people, the people that we're in relationship with, deserve quite a bit of our attention. So I think that the main thing is making sure that they're not second to anything else.
And how would one go about helping somebody to feel like they're not second to anything else if they're having a challenge in their business, or they have to work a business where they spend a lot of hours?
I think what's really interesting about spending a lot of time in your business is we assume that our business and our family are separate. And for me, I know for me personally, if I've had one of those scenarios where I've been having to work way, you know, a lot of hours, or been putting a lot of time into my career, I have to actually discover ways that I can bring my family closer to that, or bring my career closer to my family. An example of that would be if I know my daughter likes to go to work with me, which isn't always something that you can do all the time, but I have at least once every couple of months let her come to work with me, even if it's to come to lunch, which is one of those wonderful things that she loves. Or if I'm working a lot and I haven't really spent the kind of time that I would like to spend with her, I'll go to her school and go to lunch, or come and have lunch with her. So I think it's just making time for your family, even if you're in the busy times. Even in your busiest day, you tend to have lunch, so that's a good time to actually compromise and bring your family into that.
Do you believe that the old paradigm that we hold for relationships is true today? I mean, there's, you know, many different ways to look at classical love, and we see what love is supposed to be based on what we see on TV. But is that honestly the way relationships are? No, I'd say that TV doesn't really represent any truth in reality in how our lives are. But there are many people who still have that classic belief, you know, two people meet, they fall in love, they, you know, get married, white picket fence, 3.2 kids, a dog, and live happily ever after. Many of us who know that that's not necessarily the case. So what do you think the new paradigm of love, relationships, what are the possibilities for that, and how do we get to a place of possibility for relationships?
I think the first thing, I'm just going to say this is what's different than television, is the first thing that we have to recognize is that in any relationship, whether it's a friendship or love, or whether it's platonic or family, there has to be a level of transparency there. And we have to be more willing to share who we truly are. And I think one of the major points of that is that we should probably know who we are before we enter into a relationship. And not try to find ourselves within it.
Yeah, I often... Go ahead.
I've seen a lot on television that people tend to, or movies even, that people tend to try to find who they are within a relationship, or to gain something from a relationship. And I don't think relationships are what we gain, or relationships are about what we give.
Oh, very nice.
So in order to find it, I think the first thing is transparency. The second thing would be, you have to be a person who's willing to be giving, not be, a person that's necessarily there to take. And to know yourself before any relationship, because it's not designed to help you discover who you are within it.
And I know sometimes I work with clients and they were not authentically themselves when they entered the relationship, and now they have strife or struggle because of that. What kind of advice do you give to somebody in that situation?
If you find yourself already in the situation where you're in a relationship and that might not have represented yourself, I think that's exactly who you are. You want to put your best foot forward. Everyone wants to do that, of course. But you found that you've just been so good at it that you're maybe turned out to be a different person within the relationship. I would say kind of backtrack and get to discover who's the person that you are with, and the things that they are looking for in a relationship, and try to incorporate that into who you are, not necessarily that it changes who you are. But let's say that person is very outgoing and outdoorsy, and you haven't been in the past. This is where that compromise does come into effect, where you do give of yourself even in areas that may be not as natural to you, but not to the point where it changes who you are fundamentally.
That's great. That's fantastic. And the other aspect of relationships is really that in itself, not losing yourself, right? You've brought that up several times, and I think that's a very common theme. I know as a life coach, as I work with different people, I'll often hear, I've lost myself in the relationship. What advice do you have directed towards that?
It's really interesting because that happens a lot, and people feel like they have to be around the other spouse, or they have to give up friendships that they had or hobbies that they had because there doesn't seem to be quite enough time and so on to invest in a relationship. But in reality, the relationship is stronger when you keep an identity, your identity, outside of the relationship. As long as that identity honors the relationship, it will actually strengthen it, because this person that we fell in love with as a human being, this person that I fell in love with, or you fell in love with, should still be there. Otherwise, who are you growing with, or who are you experiencing with? Let's say if you go out and you're into martial arts, which you are. If you change that about yourself because of a relationship that you have, then let's say that's a big part of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that change everything about you?
Absolutely.
So wouldn't that be, I'd say, just not a wise decision?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes what we do outside of our relationship is who we are, and were we to give it up, we would be actually giving up ourselves entirely. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, if that's already happening, if you're in a relationship but that's already happening, go rediscover what it is that you love and go invest a little time in it. And again, we talked about earlier, the other person might be interested in experiencing that with you, so ask them to come along. If not, that's okay too. They're going to be really, I would say, thankful and excited that you have something new to share in the relationship, something new to talk about, and something new that they could potentially experience.
And what about moms? Because a mom's job is never done, from what I understand, and I know there's a lot of women that work, they take care of the kids, they cook, they clean, they do the whole nine, like Superwoman. How do they find a sense of balance with everything that they're experiencing?
Well, the reality is for a mom, for a mom, you're right about that, by the way, a mom's job is never done. However, moms do crave that need for an outside stimulation, not to be a mom all the time. They just don't want to feel like a mom all the time. One of the main things I would say is that it's easy to get a mom to kind of recharge or get her in a more state of peace if you can just allow her to think differently for 5 minutes. We kind of get stuck in our heads a little as women, and if you can help her have an experience, or she can choose to have an experience that's going to take her away from that, it's really, really important to her. So I would say, as a mother, what I've had to do is start in increments of just give yourself 5 minutes. 5 minutes of calmness and quiet, and then give yourself 10 minutes, whether it's just sitting in a room alone or listening to music or whatever it is that might be important to them. So I would say the person that they're with, it's important that they recognize that being a mom is one of the hardest jobs that there is, not only physically, but much more so mentally. And that if they can be open and willing to give mom a break a little bit here and there, it'll make a huge difference in not only her life, but in everyone's life around her. What is that saying they say? If mom's not happy, nobody's happy?
That's what I've heard.
So I think, people around her, such as the spouse, would recognize that if they can recognize that what she does is actually very difficult, and be willing to give her little bits of space and time, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, to the point where eventually maybe it's 30 minutes away or or maybe she's taking a painting class. Whatever it is that helps to rejuvenate and re-energize her would be extremely important to everyone in the home.
That's great. And, let's go into career a little bit, because you mentioned something before that I thought was interesting about this identity. So many times people define themselves or identify themselves as who they are is what I do. We know that there's actually so much more to people than just what they do. And whether you're a mom, whether you're, an office worker, a business owner, whatever you are, how you identify yourself actually plays a key role in your career. So what do you have to say on that subject or that idea?
Well, I think that, we've talked a couple of times about how do you uncover what people's identities are, or how do you uncover, where they're operating from. And I know that may sound strange to some, but in reality what it is simple. It's over your time, when you're growing up, or, early on in life, you are around different people who have different viewpoints on life, different belief systems, different, ways of doing things, and so on. And as you're growing up, you start to adopt other people's viewpoints, and other people's beliefs, and other people's way of being. And as we get older, we think that's just part of who we are. That's just who I am. Mm-hmm. In reality, everything that we are, to a certain point, is dictated by someone else. Whether it be a neighbor or that we spend a lot of time with, or a parents, grandparents, friends. Over time, we can create these identities, and we can actually believe that we are something, or we're meant to do something that perhaps was never a part of who we were if we were just kind of left up to us and God. So in looking at that, I would say that with identities, it's interesting how it works when I'm working with people in business and in careers, which is where this really shows itself. I tend to look at a person as though they're an onion, and that they have these layers. And at the core of these layers is the identity or the belief that creates their behavior and or their experiences. Mm-hmm. And in order to find out what that is, to see where there may be an issue, we do some exercises, which you and I do, as we do. Mm-hmm. We do exercises that allow us to get through those layers of onions to a core belief system or a core idea that is helping them to experience whether it's a positive or a negative. Generally, when we do this, it's because there's something negative happening, mm-hmm. and they don't realize they're operating within an identity. And those identities might be that they have to have more. Like, can we use an example?
Yes.
Let's say you feel like you have to have the nicest car, or that's going to be your perspective on what's nice and what isn't. But let's say you have to have so much and everything, and let's say you have to have the nice car, the nice house, handmade suits, or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. What is the internal drive that's creating that desire? And let's say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's not necessarily a bad thing unless you're hurting in another area of your life, let's say spiritual or your relationships or your well-being, to have it. Mm. If it's damaging other areas of your life and it's the only drive that you have and you don't have true internal happiness, then I would say that's probably not a good thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in that case, I would want to work with someone to uncover why. Why is it that this is such an enormous drive, even though it's damaging in so many areas of your life, it can't be a good thing. Mm. And so then we work to uncover the identities or the belief systems or the ideation behind what's motivating or driving them in this direction that's so damaging.
Yeah, and when you talk about truly being happy, I work with a lot of people, and oftentimes I'll tell them in order to truly experience happiness, you have to truly, honestly express yourself. Whether in relationships or career, I think a lot of times people make choices that aren't really the right choice for them, and they know that. But for some reason, there's a fear there, and that fear prevents them from honestly expressing themselves. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that concept?
Absolutely, and that fear creates habitual behavior. And that's kind of what comes up for me is when you talk about fear. Mm-hmm. You can most generally see that fear based on what people do habitually or the behaviors they take on that they don't feel like they can control. One of those is like if you see someone who tends to work all the time, they're compulsive. They're compulsive in that area. They constantly feel like they have to be work. They have this enormous drive, but it may just simply be because it's the only place they feel confident, and they haven't experienced that same level of confidence or that same level of success in other areas of their lives. So they tend to focus on the one area that's more comfortable, that they found whatever success that they're experiencing, and they don't know how to take that into other areas such as spiritual, their relationships, the health, the well-being, and so on. And I think I got off track as far as your question goes, so can you actually ask me that question again?
No, I think you're right on track with what you're saying as far as happiness and honestly expressing yourself.
Yeah, and it's discovering, like, what, we talked about this before in another seminar, but in another, when we were chatting on another day, and we were talking about, like, what is it that you should be doing in order to uncover or how to open up those other areas, such as spiritual and relationships and health and financial well-being and so on. What is your ideal situation for what would make you happy spiritually? What do you feel like is missing? And once you uncover what do you think is missing, what do you think it should look like? And if you did that in every area, it would give you a much better understanding of where you are in that process.
That's great. Lauren, for our listeners who want to find out more information about our Finding Balance seminar or about how to reach you, how would they do that?
Well, there's a couple ways, actually. They can give me a call. My phone number is 904-445-7624, or they can contact me via email. And my email address is McInallBound. It's MACKINAWBOUND @gmail.com. And also, if you would like, you can also look me up on Facebook, and it's under Lauren Sage.
LAURENSAGE.
LAURENSAGE, all one word. And I think my Facebook is Lauren Sage 90.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren. And we look forward to more conversations with you.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
You too.